I still remember the burning. Not just on my skin, though, trust me. That latte was scalding, but the burning behind my eyes. The absolute humiliation of standing there, dripping wet, while Jessica's perfect red lipstick curved into a smile so smug I wanted to scream. Fetch me another one, intern, and try not to mess up the order this time. The entire conference room erupted in laughter. 8 people, most of whom I'd barely spoken to, suddenly unified in their amusement at my expense. Coffee running down my cream blouse, seeping into my bra, the smell of hazelnut and shame filling my nostrils. I'd worked at Blackridge Partners for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of being called intern, despite being hired as a financial analyst. 3 weeks of Jessica Gordon treating me like her personal assistant instead of her colleague. God, I'm shaking even telling this story now. Before I go on, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe. I promise this gets good. And I really want to know in the comments if you've ever had someone like Jessica in your life. Someone who made you feel small just because they could. Anyway, I'm Renata. I'm 34 now, but I was 31 when all this happened. I'm not particularly impressive looking average height. Brown hair, I never know what to do with. The kind of face people say looks friendly when they're being nice. I'm the person who brings baked goods to the office and remembers everyone's birthdays. The one who laughs a little too loudly sometimes and apologizes too much. I'd spent most of my career at smaller firms, working my way up gradually, until my uncle Leon passed away. He wasn't rich by any means, but he'd invested wisely over the years in a handful of companies. One of those was Blackridge. His will left me his entire portfolio, including a 17% stake in Blackridge Partners, which technically made me the 3rd largest individual shareholder. But here's the thing, nobody at Blackridge knew that. When I applied for the job, I used my mother's maiden name. I wanted to understand the company from the inside before making any decisions about my inheritance. Were they ethical? Did they treat people well? Was this somewhere I wanted my money invested long-term? Jessica Gordon was giving me my answer, one humiliating coffee splash at a time. She was head of client acquisitions, 38, blonde, immaculate, the kind of woman who somehow never has a wrinkle in her clothes or a hair out of place. She wore her power like expensive perfume, too much of it, and always making sure you noticed. That morning, she'd asked me to grab coffee for the pre-meeting. I'd done it, even though it wasn't remotely my job, because I was still the newest person and trying to be helpful. She'd taken one sip, scrunched up her face like I'd handed her sewage, and then, splash. Right in my face, in front of everyone. Jessica, I said quietly, coffee dripping from my chin onto the conference table. That was completely unnecessary. Oh my God, she rolled her eyes dramatically. Learn to take a joke, and learn how to make a proper coffee. I asked for almond milk. This is clearly oat milk. It wasn't. It was exactly what she'd asked for. I knew because I'd triple-checked her order after she'd corrected me twice already. I specifically asked for, I started, but she cut me off. God, just go clean yourself up, you look pathetic. She turned to her colleague, Daniel, who was failing to hide his smirk. This is why we don't hire from state schools, Daniel. For the record, I have an MBA from Northwestern. Not that it should matter. I stood there, frozen. I've always been the kind of person who thinks of the perfect comeback 3 hours later while staring at my bedroom ceiling. In that moment, all I could feel was shame crawling up my neck like a rash. Then the door opened. Martin Chen, the CFO, walked in with a manila folder and a look of concern when he saw me standing there, stained and shaking. What happened here? He asked, glancing between me and Jessica. Just a little accident, Jessica said smoothly. Our intern is a bit clumsy. Martin frowned slightly but seemed too preoccupied to question it further. Well, I have the updated shareholder information for the quarterly review. Jessica, you'll need to incorporate this into your presentation for tomorrow. He passed out copies from his folder. I watched as everyone at the table received their packet. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise. This wasn't how I'd planned for my identity to be revealed, but maybe it was perfect timing after all. Martin? I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I believe I should have a copy as well. Jessica let out an exasperated sigh. This is confidential financial information. Interns don't receive these packets. Actually, Martin said, looking at me more carefully, she's right. Ms. Caldwell should have a copy. Jessica frowned. Miss who? Her name is Renata Baker. Martin handed me a packet. Baker is her mother's name. Caldwell is her legal surname. The room went quiet as everyone looked down at the papers, scanning until they found the shareholder list. I could pinpoint the exact moment each person saw my name. Eyes widening, heads snapping up to stare at me. Jessica flipped frantically through her pages. I watched her face drain of color as she found what she was looking for. Renata Caldwell. 17% ownership, she whispered. That's impossible. That would make you the third largest individual shareholder. I finished for her, wiping coffee from my cheek with the back of my hand. Yes. But you're an intern, she said, her voice small now. Actually, Jessica, I said, standing up straighter despite the coffee still dripping from my blouse. I was hired as a financial analyst. And about your contract. The room was so silent you could hear the air conditioning hum. My contract? Her voice cracked slightly. I nodded slowly. Your department falls under shareholder review next month, doesn't it? 5 minutes earlier, I'd been the pathetic, coffee-soaked nobody. Now, every eye in that conference room looked at me differently. Fear, respect, confusion, it was all there. Let me pause for a second to say something that might sound strange. It didn't feel good. Not really. Have you ever had something you've fantasized about happening, but when it finally does, it just feels hollow? That's what it was like. I'd spent 3 weeks being invisible, being mistreated, gathering information about the toxic culture Jessica had created in her department. I'd learned that turnover in her team was 78% higher than any other department. I'd discovered she'd driven away 3 highly qualified candidates because they threatened her position. I'd watched her take credit for other people's work so many times I'd lost count. And now I had the power to do something about it. But power is complicated, right? I should backtrack a bit. My Uncle Leon wasn't just some random investor. He'd been on the founding team of Blackridge 30 years earlier, back when it was just 3 guys with a business plan working out of a garage. He stayed mostly behind the scenes, but he was brilliant with numbers and strategy. When he got sick, he started talking to me about the company, about its values, its people. The heart of any business is its people, Rennie. He'd told me during one of our last conversations. Not the clients, not the profits. The people who show up every day and choose to give their energy to something bigger than themselves. I'd promised him I'd look after his legacy. That's why I'd joined as a regular employee, instead of waltzing in as a major shareholder. I needed to understand what Blackridge had become. And what it had become, at least in Jessica's department, was a place where people were afraid, where kissing up and kicking down was the fastest way to advance, where someone like Jessica could throw hot coffee at a colleague and expect everyone to laugh along. So there I stood, coffee-stained, and somehow holding all the cards. I think, I said carefully, this meeting should adjourn for now. I need to change, and I believe we all have some things to process. I turned to Martin. Could you schedule some time for us to speak privately this afternoon? He nodded quickly. Of course, Miss Caldwell. Whenever works for you. Jessica remained frozen, her perfect composure shattered. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. How to spin this. How to salvage her position. How to make me an ally instead of a threat. Renata, she said, her voice artificially warm. I'm so sorry about the coffee. It was just a joke that went too far. Let me take you to lunch today, my treat. We should get to know each other better. The whiplash of her sudden respect made me feel slightly nauseous. I have other plans for lunch, I said, but I'll be reviewing the organizational structure of your department this week. We can meet on Friday. I left that conference room with coffee-soaked dignity but a clear purpose. I wasn't going to be the villain of this story. I wasn't going to fire Jessica in some dramatic boardroom showdown. That's what people would expect. The sweet revenge of the underdog suddenly given power. But what I wanted wasn't revenge. What I wanted was change. Wait, no. That's a lie. I did want revenge. God, I wanted it so badly I could taste it, metallic and sweet like blood from biting my cheek. I wanted to see her squirm. I wanted to make her pack her designer handbags into a cardboard box and walk out of the building with security watching. And that's the part of myself I didn't particularly like. The part that Uncle Leon would have been disappointed to see. I went home that day and sat on my bathroom floor, still smelling like hazelnut coffee, and I cried. Not because of Jessica, but because I finally understood the weight of what my uncle had left me. Not just shares in a company, but responsibility for people's livelihoods. The power to reshape someone's life with a single decision. I stayed home the next day, told them I needed time to review company materials, which wasn't entirely untrue. What I really needed was space to think about what kind of person I wanted to be. What kind of leader? By Wednesday, rumors were swirling. Jessica sent me 3 emails, each more desperate than the last, offering to mentor me, to show me the ropes of leadership, to forge a productive partnership. Thursday morning, I walked into Blackridge wearing my best blazer and the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was going to do. The whispers followed me down every hallway. People who'd never acknowledged my existence suddenly knew my name, my coffee order, my favorite lunch spot. It was surreal and honestly, a little gross. Jessica was waiting outside my tiny cubicle, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Renata, I've been trying to reach you. I put together some thoughts on departmental improvements I'd love to discuss." I nodded politely. "We're still on for tomorrow, Jessica. 10 a.m. in the main conference room." Her smile faltered. "Actually, I was hoping we could speak privately. Just the 2 of us." "That won't be necessary," I said. "Everything that needs to be said should be on record. I've invited HR to join us." The color drained from her face for the second time that week. HR? But this is just a departmental discussion. We don't need to formalize anything yet. "My coffee stains disagree," I said quietly. As I watched her walk away, heels clicking rapidly like a frightened heartbeat, I felt that pull again, the desire to crush her completely, to make an example of her, to show everyone what happens when you humiliate someone just because you think you can. I spent that night rehearsing what I would say, how I would restructure her department, how I would address her behavior, whether I would let her keep her job. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And as I walked into that conference room where my humiliation had begun just 4 days earlier, I realized all eyes were on me now. Not with mockery, but with a weird kind of fearful respect that made me deeply uncomfortable. Jessica was already seated, a thick binder of materials in front of her, hair perfect, expression carefully composed. The HR director, Lucia, sat to my right. Martin chose a seat directly across from Jessica. I placed my coffee bought from the same cafe as Monday's disaster deliberately on the table between us. "Let's begin," I said. The room felt different this time. 4 days earlier, I'd been invisible. Now everyone was watching me like I might spontaneously combust or announce world domination. Jessica's eyes kept darting between my face and the coffee cup, like she was calculating the odds of history repeating itself in reverse. God, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. Just once, very briefly. Just reach across but that's not who I am. Even if sometimes I wish it could be. I've spent the last few days reviewing the structure and performance of the client acquisitions department. I began. I've spoken with HR about turnover rates, exit interviews, and complaints filed over the past 18 months. Jessica's professionally pleasant smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened around her pen. "I've also reviewed your personal performance metrics, Jessica. Here's where I want to pause the story and tell you something important. When you suddenly find yourself with power over someone who's been cruel to you, you learn something about yourself. Something that might surprise you. And it's not always something you like. Because in that moment, seeing Jessica's carefully controlled panic, feeling the entire room hold its collective breath, I liked it. I enjoyed watching her squirm. There was this dark, ugly satisfaction spreading through my chest, and part of me wanted to drag this out just to watch her suffer longer. That's the part of revenge they don't talk about in movies. How it can make you feel powerful and awful at the exact same time. "Your client acquisition numbers are excellent," I continued. You've consistently exceeded targets for bringing in new business. Your presentations to the board have been exemplary. On paper, you're a stellar performer. Something like hope flickered in her eyes, like maybe she'd weathered the storm. However, I said, opening a folder of my own, your departmental turnover is catastrophic. In the past year alone, 17 employees have left your team. The exit interviews cite the same issues repeatedly. I looked directly at her now. Bullying, taking credit for others' work, creating a hostile work environment, threatening people's job security if they don't comply with demands outside their job description. Jessica's mask slipped for just a second before she recovered. With all due respect, Ms. Caldwell, high-performance environments aren't for everyone. I push my team because excellence requires pressure. Martin shifted uncomfortably. Jessica has always delivered results. At what cost? I asked quietly. The company has spent over $300,000 in recruitment and training costs just to replace the people who couldn't tolerate working with her. That's not counting the institutional knowledge lost or the clients who've complained about constantly dealing with new faces. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee. And then there's the matter of how you treat people you perceive as beneath you, like throwing hot coffee at a colleague because you could. That was a joke that went too far, Jessica said quickly. I've already apologized for that. Actually, you haven't, I replied. You offered to buy me lunch and mentor me once you realized I held significant power over your career. That's not an apology. That's self-preservation. Lucia from HR cleared her throat. We have documentation of 7 incidents over the past year that would qualify as workplace harassment, all involving Ms. Gordon. Jessica's perfect composure finally cracked. This is absurd. I've been with Blackridge for 9 years. I've brought in millions in new business. And you're going to let some nepotism case who's been here 5 minutes destroy my career over hurt feelings? The room went silent. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see if I'd explode. If this would become the corporate equivalent of a hair-pulling catfight. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of the games, tired of the posturing, tired of people like Jessica thinking cruelty was a leadership strategy. No one's destroying your career, Jessica, I said calmly. You're being offered a choice. I slid a document across the table to her. Option 1. You can accept a lateral move to our research division. Same salary, different responsibilities, no direct reports. A 6-month probationary period with regular check-ins from HR regarding professional conduct. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the paperwork. Option 2 is in the second folder, I continued. It details the severance package we're prepared to offer if you choose to leave Blackridge. You can't just demote me. Her voice rose sharply. I've earned my position. Your position includes managing people, I said. And you've demonstrated repeatedly that you're either unwilling or unable to do that ethically. She turned to Martin, desperation evident. You can't seriously be considering this. My client relationships alone will be handled by capable team members who already do most of the work anyway, I finished for her. According to their own statements. Jessica's face flushed red. You have no idea what it takes to succeed in this industry. I've had to be twice as tough, twice as aggressive as any man to get where I am. And now you want to punish me for not being nice enough? Her words hit something raw in me, because in some twisted way, I understood. Women in finance walk a brutal tightrope. Too soft and you're ineffective. Too hard and you're a bitch. I'd spent years tiptoeing that line myself. This isn't about being nice, I said quietly. This is about basic human decency. About not terrorizing your team. About not throwing hot coffee at someone because they used the wrong milk. She flinched at that. You have until Monday to decide, I continued. Take the weekend to consider your options. Jessica stood abruptly, gathering her papers with shaking hands. My attorney will be in touch, she snapped, striding toward the door. But we all heard the tremor in her voice. After she left, Martin turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That was handled differently than I expected, he said. How did you expect me to handle it? I asked. He shrugged. Honestly, I thought you'd fire her on the spot. Most people would have, given the opportunity and what she did to you. I nodded slowly. I considered it. Lucia looked relieved. I think the approach you've taken shows real leadership. Firing her outright could have created legal issues. Not to mention it might have seemed personally motivated. It would have been personally motivated, I admitted. That's exactly why I didn't do it. When the meeting ended, I went back to my cubicle, the same tiny space I'd occupied before everyone knew who I really was. I sat there for a long time wondering if I'd done the right thing. Had I been too harsh? Not harsh enough? Should I have just transferred to another department myself and avoided the whole mess? I expected to feel triumphant. I'd confronted my bully. I'd held her accountable. I'd used my power responsibly, even when the temptation to do otherwise had been strong. Instead, I just felt complicated, messy, human. By Monday morning, the office was buzzing with rumors. Jessica hadn't been seen. Her office door remained closed. People kept finding excuses to walk past my desk, hoping for gossip I wouldn't provide. At 9:15, Lucia from HR called. Jessica's made her decision. She'd like to meet with both of us at 10. My stomach nodded. I'd spent the weekend oscillating between guilt and righteous anger, between second-guessing myself and reminding myself of how it felt to stand there dripping with coffee while an entire room laughed. Jessica was already in the conference room when we arrived. Her makeup was flawless as always, but there was something different about her, a stillness that hadn't been there before. She looked up as I entered. I've decided to accept the transfer to research. I nodded, relieved in a way I hadn't expected. I think that's a wise choice. Not because I agree with your assessment, she added quickly, but because I've invested too much in this company to walk away. Lucia pushed the paperwork across the table. We'll need to go through the terms again to make sure everything's clear. As Jessica signed her name on line after line, I felt no satisfaction, no joy, just a quiet certainty that this was necessary. Not just for me, but for every person who'd ever been made to feel small in her presence. When we finished, Jessica looked at me directly for the first time since entering the room. You know, she said, her voice carefully controlled, I thought you were weak. That first day, when you just stood there with coffee dripping down your face, not fighting back. I thought you were pathetic. I said nothing, waiting. I wonder if you'll still be the nice, smiling Renata a year from now, she continued. Power changes people, usually not for the better. Maybe, I acknowledged. But treating people with basic respect isn't about being nice. It's about being human. She gathered her things and stood. Good luck with that philosophy. This industry will eat you alive. After she left, Lucia exhaled heavily. Well, that could have gone worse. I smiled thinly. The day's still young. The next few weeks were a strange adjustment period. The client acquisitions team was reorganized. I moved to a proper office. My role expanded to include consulting on major financial decisions, as befitted my shareholder status. People stopped calling me intern and started calling me Ms. Caldwell instead. I missed being invisible sometimes, missed the clarity of being underestimated. Jessica and I avoided each other successfully for nearly a month. When we did pass in hallways, she'd nod stiffly, I'd nod back, and we'd continue in opposite directions. Office politics at its most basic. Then came the Anderson account presentation. It was a major potential client, one Jessica had been cultivating for months before her transfer. I'd been asked to join the pitch meeting because of my financial expertise. We found ourselves in the same conference room where she'd thrown coffee at me, the first time we'd been back there together since that day. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Jessica presented her research impeccably. I handled the financial projections. We functioned like professional strangers, neither acknowledging our history. The client seemed impressed, asking thoughtful questions that we answered in careful tandem. Afterward, as everyone filed out, I hung back to gather my notes. So did Jessica. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Nice work in there, I finally said, because someone had to say something. She looked at me searchingly. You didn't have to give me credit for the initial client contact. You could have taken that for yourself. I shrugged. It was your work. I don't take credit for things I didn't do. Unlike me? The question had an edge, but also something like genuine curiosity. I didn't say that. She sighed, smoothing her already perfect hair. The research division isn't as terrible as I expected. It's quieter. I get to focus on the work instead of managing personalities. That's good? I wasn't sure where this conversation was headed. Jessica gathered her folders deliberately. I'm not going to apologize again, or pretend we're friends now, but I respect that you could have destroyed me, and you didn't. That was never my goal. Wasn't it? She looked at me sharply. Not even for a moment? I considered lying, then decided against it. For a moment, yes. Several moments, actually. But revenge fantasies are different from actions. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Well, anyway, thank you for not throwing coffee at me today. I wouldn't have shown the same restraint. And with that, she walked out. I sat there a long time after she left, turning our conversation over in my mind. It wasn't forgiveness, not from either side. It wasn't even really closure. It was just a moment of honest acknowledgement between two complicated women with complicated feelings. In the months that followed, Blackridge changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually. I used my position to implement stronger anti-bullying policies. Exit interviews became mandatory. Anonymous feedback channels were created for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Jessica remained in research, where by all accounts she excelled. We maintained our professional distance, though occasionally I'd catch her watching me in meetings with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Curiosity? Resentment? Something else entirely? When people ask me now about the coffee incident, and yes, it became legendary enough in company lore to earn that title, I usually just smile and change the subject. It's not because I'm embarrassed or because I regret how I handled things. It's because the story isn't really about coffee or contracts or corporate power plays. It's about what we do when we suddenly have power over someone who's hurt us. It's about the thin line between justice and vengeance. It's about recognizing that even people who've been cruel can be more complicated than they first appear. Sometimes at company events, Jessica and I still end up in the same conversational circle. There's always that moment of recognition, that shared memory of coffee splashing, of humiliation, of power suddenly shifting. We'll make brief eye contact, both acknowledging the moment without speaking of it. Then we'll return to discussing quarterly projections or market trends. Two professional women who once occupied opposite ends of a power dynamic, now existing in the complicated middle ground of mutual respect without friendship. I never did get coffee for anyone else at Blackridge. Small victories, right? So that's my story. Not a fairy tale revenge where the villain gets spectacularly destroyed and everyone cheers. Not a perfect resolution where former enemies become best friends. Just a messy human situation where I tried to do the right thing, even when part of me wanted to do the satisfying thing instead. If you've ever been in a position where someone treated you like you were nothing, only to later discover you held power they never suspected, well, I hope my story helps somehow. There's no perfect way to handle it, no guidebook for navigating that bizarre emotional terrain. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be when the tables turn, and hope that decision is one you can live with long after the satisfaction of revenge has faded. If you liked this story, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments if you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between revenge and something more complicated. And if Jessica happens to be watching this, the coffee shop on 9th still makes that hazelnut latte. Just saying. I'll take legal action against you, Victor spat, his face inches from mine. The conference room went silent as 27 colleagues stared, frozen mid-motion. Some clutched their pens tighter, others averted their eyes, but all held their breath. The quarterly staff meeting had derailed spectacularly when I'd refused to approve the Riverside Plaza designs. You think anyone cares about a few inches of doorway width? About some stupid bumpy strips on the ground? He stabbed his finger into my project folder. You're costing us millions with these ridiculous demands. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. Those stupid bumpy strips are the difference between a blind person finding their way safely or getting lost. Those few inches determine if someone can use a bathroom or not. Victor's eyes narrowed to slits. His tie, bright red, like a warning sign, hung crookedly from his neck. Bryn, you're done. I'm calling my attorney right now. We'll sue you personally for breach of contract and professional sabotage. The room seemed to shrink. Two interns exchanged wide-eyed glances. My direct supervisor studied her coffee cup as if it contained ancient wisdom. Nobody moved to defend me. Please do, I replied, gathering my things with hands that refused to tremble. Call your attorney. I'd love to explain exactly how many accessibility violations you've pressured me to overlook. His lips curled into an ugly sneer. You've signed off on every project. Your signature, your professional liability. Remember that. What he didn't know was that I remembered everything. Every conversation, every threat, every modification I'd been forced to make against my better judgment. What he couldn't see was the small recording device in my blazer pocket, the one that had captured our private meetings for months. Meeting adjourned, Victor announced, already pulling out his phone. I walked out with my head high, feeling 27 pairs of eyes boring into my back. Through the glass wall, I watched him pace, gesturing wildly into his phone. His face twisted with rage, then shifted to confusion, then drained of color entirely. 23 minutes later, as I sat in my car wondering if I'd just destroyed my career, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You might want to see this. Attached was a recording that would change everything. I never expected this story to resonate with so many of you. If you're finding yourself drawn into what happened next, take a second to hit like and subscribe. I post new content every week about standing up against workplace injustice. Drop a comment about whether you've ever had to make a difficult ethical stand at work. Your experiences help others feel less alone. My name is Bryn Harlow, and until 3 months ago, I was the Senior Accessibility Compliance Specialist at one of the largest urban development firms in the Northeast. For nearly 4 years, I reviewed building plans to ensure they met the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements: ramp gradients, doorway widths, tactile pathways, bathroom dimensions. Not glamorous work, but work that mattered. I grew up with my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. When she had a stroke at 72, I watched her world shrink overnight. Suddenly, 3 steps might as well have been a mountain. A door 2 inches too narrow meant she couldn't enter. The woman who once traveled the world was now trapped by poor design. That's why I became an accessibility specialist. Because architecture isn't just about aesthetics. It's about who gets included and who gets shut out. At first, the job felt meaningful. I caught violations before construction began. I educated architects about universal design principles. I believed I was making the world a little more navigable for people like my grandmother. Then Victor became the new director. Our first clash happened 6 weeks after his arrival. The Pinewood Medical Center plans came across my desk with significant violations: insufficient turning radiuses in patient bathrooms, emergency call buttons mounted too high, examination tables not designed for transfer from wheelchairs. These need major revisions, I told him, highlighting the issues. Victor leaned against my desk, arms crossed. The client's already approved the budget. Make it work. It doesn't meet code. I can't sign off. Look, Bryn, he said, lowering his voice. This is a $30 million project. The client will walk if we increase costs now. Just be flexible on the interpretations. There's no interpretation of a 60-inch turning radius. It either is or isn't. His friendly demeanor vanished. You're new to the big leagues. Sometimes compliance is negotiable. That night, I couldn't sleep. Was this normal? Was I being rigid? I called my mentor from graduate school, who confirmed my suspicions. Victor was asking me to break the law. The next morning, I revised the plans myself, detailing exactly what needed changing to meet requirements. I sent them directly to the project architect, copying Victor. 2 hours later, he stormed to my cubicle. Who authorized you to contact the architect directly? I'm doing my job. These aren't suggestions. They're legal requirements. His voice dropped to a whisper. Listen carefully. There are 20 people in line for your position who understand how things really work. Don't make me replace you. I swallowed hard but held my ground. I won't approve non-compliant designs. For weeks, we engaged in a silent war. I would reject plans. Mysterious, revised versions with my forged signature would appear. I would flag violations. Victor would dismiss them as minor issues. The Pinewood project moved forward with half my recommendations ignored. Then came the day I received an email that made my blood run cold. It was from a mother whose son used a wheelchair. They'd visited the newly opened Pinewood Medical Center, and he'd been unable to use the bathroom independently. The turning radius was too small. exactly as I'd warned. I thought places like this were supposed to be accessible, she wrote. My son was humiliated. I printed her email and walked straight into Victor's office, closing the door behind me. This is why compliance matters, I said, placing the letter on his desk. He barely glanced at it. One complaint from one person. Cost of doing business. That one person is exactly who these laws are designed to protect. Victor leaned back in his chair. You know what your problem is, Bryn? You think these regulations are sacred texts. They're guidelines, open to interpretation. They're civil rights laws, I countered. Would you call racial discrimination laws guidelines? His face hardened. Don't be dramatic. We're talking about a few inches here and there. A few inches that determine if someone can use a bathroom or not. He stood up suddenly. I'm done having this conversation. The Riverside Plaza plans need your sign-off by tomorrow. Make it happen. Those plans had even worse violations than Pinewood, and I knew then that this pattern would continue project after project unless something changed. That night, I made a decision that would eventually lead to that confrontation in the conference room, to Victor's threats of legal action, and to the text message that now sat on my phone, waiting to be opened. I clicked on the attachment, holding my breath. The recording began with Victor's voice, tight with controlled rage. She's completely out of line, Patrick. I need you to shut her down. Breach of contract, professional sabotage, anything. Make an example of her. A pause, then a deeper voice responded. Which compliance regulations is she insisting on? All of them. Doorway widths, ramp gradients, bathroom dimensions. She's treating the ADA like it's scripture. Another pause. And you want her to not enforce these requirements? I want her to be reasonable. These aren't hospital rooms. They're retail spaces and office buildings. Nobody's life depends on an extra 2 inches of doorway. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. When the other man, presumably Patrick, Victor's attorney, spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Victor, my daughter Lily uses a wheelchair. She's 12. Do you know how many places she can't go because of just 2 inches? How many times we've had to leave restaurants because she couldn't use the bathroom? How many school events she's missed because there wasn't a ramp? Victor's stammering response was painful to hear. I didn't realize. No, you didn't. Patrick cut in, his voice ice cold. And let me be crystal clear. I will not be representing you in this matter. In fact, I'll be personally notifying the state licensing board about these violations. Patrick, wait. I've advised many difficult clients, Victor, but I draw the line at someone who knowingly violates accessibility laws. Laws that exist so people like my daughter can participate in society with basic dignity. You can't. I absolutely can. And I will. Good luck finding another attorney willing to defend intentional ADA violations. They're not just compliance issues. They're civil rights violations. The recording ended. I sat frozen in my car, heart pounding. Through my windshield, I could see the office building where, up on the 14th floor, Victor was probably having the worst day of his professional life. My phone buzzed again with another text from the unknown number. He's in full panic mode. Board members have been called in. Thought you should know. I stared at my phone, trying to process what was happening. The mysterious ally had to be someone inside the office, someone who'd witnessed the confrontation and decided to help me. But who? I drove home in a daze, adrenaline still coursing through my body. My apartment felt like a stranger's place. I walked from room to room, unable to settle. Had I just ended my career? Or had I finally done what I should have done months ago? At 7:38 p.m., my phone rang. The screen displayed Meera Chaudhry, the firm's HR director. Bryn, can you come in tomorrow morning at 9? The executive board wants to meet with you. My stomach dropped. Am I fired? A pause. Just be there at 9. And Bryn, bring any documentation you have regarding the accessibility issues you've raised. I spent the night gathering evidence, emails, project notes, revised plans showing the before and after of Victor's adjustments. Around 3 a.m., I found myself staring at my grandmother's photograph on my nightstand. Was this worth it, Gran? I whispered to her smiling face. She'd always told me to stand my ground when it mattered, but she'd never mentioned how terrifying it would feel. Morning came too quickly. I dressed carefully. Charcoal gray pantsuit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back, professional, unshakable. The opposite of how I felt. The executive boardroom was silent when I entered. 7 people sat around the table, including Meera from HR and Elliot Greaves, the company's founder. Victor sat at the far end, his face ashen. Miss Harlow, Elliot began, we understand you have concerns about our compliance practices. For the next hour, I presented my evidence. The Pinewood Medical Center bathroom that didn't meet turning radius requirements. The Riverside Plaza with insufficient, accessible parking. The Oak Ridge Mall with inadequate tactile pathways for the visually impaired. Project after project where accessibility had been compromised for aesthetics or cost savings. I showed them the email from the mother whose son couldn't use the Pinewood bathroom. I shared letters from advocacy groups questioning our firm's commitment to accessibility. This isn't just about following rules, I concluded. It's about whether we're creating spaces that welcome everyone or exclude the most vulnerable. The board members exchanged glances. Victor stared at the table, jaw clenched. Elliot cleared his throat. Victor, would you care to respond? Victor's head snapped up. These are complex projects with hundreds of requirements. Minor oversights happen. Bryn is blowing this out of proportion. Minor oversights? I echoed. Is that what you call it when you told me? And I quote, nobody's going to notice if the Braille signage isn't perfect? I never said that. I pulled out my phone. Would you like me to play the recording? The room went completely still. Victor's face drained of color. You recorded our conversations? He whispered. After you started altering my signed documents? Yes, I did. Mira leaned forward. You altered signed compliance documents? Victor's eyes darted around the room, seeking an ally and finding none. We had deadlines to meet, budgets to maintain. She was being obstinate. She was doing her job, Elliot said quietly. The job we hired her to do. What followed was the most uncomfortable 30 minutes of my professional life. The board asked pointed questions about specific projects, violations, and Victor's instructions to me. With each answer, Victor seemed to shrink smaller in his chair. Finally, Elliot turned to me. Miss Harlow, we owe you an apology. This company was founded on principles of integrity and excellence. Somewhere along the way, it seems we lost sight of that. I nodded, unsure what to say. We'd like you to stay on, he continued. In fact, we'd like to create a new position, Director of Accessibility and Compliance, reporting directly to me. Would that interest you? The offer stunned me. Yes, it would. Excellent. Mira will work out the details with you. He turned to Victor. As for you, we'll continue this conversation privately. As the meeting dispersed, Victor caught up to me in the hallway, his expression a mix of fury and panic. You planned this, he hissed. You set me up. I met his gaze steadily. No, Victor. You set yourself up the moment you decided some people's access to the world was negotiable. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. This isn't over. You think you've won? I built relationships with every major client this firm has. They'll follow me. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe they'll prefer working with a firm that doesn't expose them to lawsuits and bad publicity. His eyes narrowed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. As he stormed away, I realized he was right. I didn't know what Victor was capable of when cornered. And despite the apparent victory, a cold weight settled in my stomach. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Little did I know, Victor's threat in the hallway wasn't empty words. Within days, I would discover exactly how far he would go to destroy me, and how much I would need to sacrifice to stop him. The first warning came from an unexpected source. Zoe, a junior designer who'd always been friendly but not particularly close to me, slipped a note onto my new desk 2 days later. He's meeting with Tanner Holdings tonight. Be careful. Tanner Holdings was our biggest client, responsible for nearly 40% of the firm's annual revenue. If Victor convinced them to follow him to a new firm, my victory would be short-lived, and dozens of my colleagues would lose their jobs. I stared at the note, heart racing. The war I thought I'd won had only just begun. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by project files. My promotion came with access to records I'd never seen before, including the complete client histories and financial arrangements Victor had negotiated. What I found made my stomach turn. The Tanner Holdings contracts contained special accommodation clauses that essentially allowed them to bypass standard compliance reviews for aesthetic considerations. It was corporate, speak for ignoring, accessibility laws whenever they interfered with their design vision. I was still processing this discovery when my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Drew, one of the project architects who had always been quietly supportive. Can I come in? He asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Once inside, he didn't waste time. Victor called an emergency meeting with Tanner Holdings tonight. He's telling them you're on a crusade that will add millions to their development costs. How do you know this? Drew hesitated. I was invited. As were half the senior architects. He's building a coalition, Bryn. He's promising to start a new firm that will be more pragmatic about regulations. You mean illegal? I corrected. Call it what you want, but 5 architects are ready to follow him. If Tanner goes too, the firm could collapse. I sank into a chair. Why are you telling me this? Drew's expression softened. My brother has multiple sclerosis. 5 years ago, he could walk. Now he uses a wheelchair. I've watched his world shrink building by building. He leaned forward. Victor doesn't just want to leave. He wants to destroy you first. He's telling everyone you fabricated evidence against him. After Drew left, I called Elliot at home, something I'd never done before. He listened silently as I explained what was happening. Come to my house, he finally said. Now. An hour later, I sat in Elliot's study with him and 2 board members. The gravity on their faces told me everything. Tanner Holdings represents nearly 40% of our annual revenue, one board member said. If they leave, we'll have to lay off half the staff by Christmas. So what are you saying? I asked, though I already knew. Elliot rubbed his temples. Maybe we were hasty. Perhaps a compromise. A compromise on accessibility laws? I interrupted. There is no compromise on civil rights. Bryn, be reasonable. We're talking about people's livelihoods. And I'm talking about people's lives. Every compromise means someone can't enter a building, use a bathroom, navigate a public space. The room fell silent. I could feel my new position slipping away before I'd even settled into it. What if, I said carefully, there was another way to handle Tanner? 3 sets of eyes locked onto mine. I need 24 hours, I continued, and complete access to all Tanner project files. Elliot studied me. What are you planning? Better if you don't know yet, but I promise I won't do anything to harm the firm. He hesitated, then nodded. 24 hours. I worked through the night, combing through years of Tanner Holdings projects. By morning, I'd identified 17 buildings with significant accessibility violations, all approved under Victor's supervision, all potentially exposing Tanner to millions in litigation. At 7 a.m., I walked into the office of Andrea Luna, the city's most prominent disability rights attorney. By 10 a.m., I had what I needed. That afternoon, I pulled into the parking lot of Tanner Holdings headquarters. The sleek glass building loomed above me. Ironic, given its own accessibility issues that I'd flagged 2 years earlier and Victor had dismissed. In the lobby, I asked for Preston Tanner. His assistant looked at me skeptically. Mr. Tanner is extremely busy today. Do you have an appointment? Tell him Bryn Harlow is here regarding potential Ada litigation. 10 minutes later, I sat across from Preston Tanner himself, a man whose signature had authorized millions in construction with blatant accessibility violations. Miss Harlow, he began smoothly, Victor has already explained your zealous approach to compliance. I placed a folder on his desk. This contains documentation of 17 Tanner properties with significant accessibility violations. The second folder contains Andrea Luna's assessment of potential damages should a class action lawsuit be filed. His face tightened. Is this a threat? No, it's an opportunity. I slid a third folder across his desk. This contains revised plans for all 17 buildings, retrofitting costs, timeline for compliance, and most importantly, a pledge from our firm to cover 30% of those costs. Preston blinked. Why would your firm absorb those costs? Because we should have never approved the original plans. We failed in our professional duty. I leaned forward. Mr. Tanner, Victor is offering to help you continue ignoring these laws. I'm offering to help you comply with them at reduced cost and with no publicity. And if I prefer Victor's approach? I held his gaze. Andrea Luna has the same documentation I just showed you. She's prepared to file tomorrow. His expression darkened. That's definitely a threat. No. A threat would be telling you that we've identified potential tax irregularities in how these accessibility shortcuts were accounted for. This was a calculated bluff, but his sudden pallor told me it had hit a nerve. The meeting lasted another hour. By the end, Preston Tanner had agreed to remain with our firm and implement the retrofitting plan. More importantly, he'd agreed to make a public commitment to accessibility in all future projects. I drove back to our office feeling hollow rather than triumphant. I'd won, but through tactics that left a bitter taste. Elliot was waiting when I returned. Tanner just called me. What did you do? I explained the agreement, watching his expression shift from shock to grudging admiration. That was audacious, he said finally. It was necessary. Victor won't take this lying down. He was right. Victor's retaliation came swiftly and brutally. The next morning, an email circulated to the entire firm and major clients, claiming I had engaged in extortion and unethical practices. Attached were edited snippets of conversations that made it sound like I had threatened clients for personal gain. What followed were the most grueling weeks of my professional life. Each day brought new allegations. Victor had been methodical, building his case against me for months, saving out of context statements and manipulating documentation. 3 clients requested I be removed from their projects. 2 board members suggested placing me on leave while the allegations were investigated. Even Drew began avoiding my eyes in the hallway. The worst moment came when Elliot called me into his office, his expression grave. "The board is concerned, Bryn. These allegations are false," I insisted. "Victor manipulated those recordings, perhaps, but perception matters in this business. Clients are nervous." My throat tightened. "So you're firing me?" "No," he sighed. "But we need to move you to internal projects only. No client contact until this resolves." It was a demotion in all but name. As I walked back to my office, I passed the conference room where it had all started, where Victor had threatened legal action and unwittingly set his own downfall in motion. Only his downfall hadn't happened. Somehow, despite everything, he was winning. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by evidence that now seemed useless. Victor had poisoned the well so thoroughly that the truth hardly mattered anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, the same one that had sent me the recording of Victor and his lawyer. "Don't give up. Check your email in 10 minutes. At precisely 9 p.m., an email arrived from an anonymous address. The subject line read simply, "The truth about Victor." The attachment was a video file. With shaking hands, I clicked play. The screen showed Victor in a hotel bar, speaking to someone off camera. He was clearly intoxicated, tie loosened, gesturing expansively. "She thinks she's so righteous with her accessibility crusade," he slurred. "You know what I tell clients? Just build it however you want. If someone complains, it's cheaper to settle one lawsuit than redesign the whole building." The off-camera voice asked something I couldn't hear. Victor laughed. "Ethics? In this business? Look, 90% of people don't need ramps or special bathrooms. Why spend millions accommodating the other 10%? He continued, growing more animated, outlining his systematic approach to circumventing accessibility laws, admitting to falsifying compliance documents, and boasting about the kickbacks he received for saving clients' money. It was a complete confession, damning in every way. As the video ended, a final text came through. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., board meeting. This goes to every board member, client, and regulatory agency unless you stop it." I stared at my phone, heart pounding. The mysterious ally was offering me complete victory. Victor would be ruined professionally, possibly even criminally charged. All I had to do was show up and watch it happen. If you're feeling as conflicted as I was in this moment, you're not alone. What would you do with this kind of power over someone who tried to destroy you? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and hit subscribe if you want to see how this ethical dilemma resolves. Sometimes the most difficult choices reveal who we truly are. The boardroom was eerily silent as I entered the next morning. Every member was present, along with Mira from HR and the company's general counsel. Victor sat at the far end, looking smug. "Thank you all for coming," Elliot began. "We're here to address the allegations against Bryn Harlow and determine appropriate action." Victor straightened his perfectly pressed shirt. "I believe the evidence I've provided speaks for itself." "Does it?" I asked quietly, "because I have evidence of my own." I connected my laptop to the projection system. Victor's smile didn't waver. He thought he knew what I had. He was wrong. I didn't play the video from the hotel bar. Instead, I displayed a series of unaltered project documents, showing the original accessibility violations, alongside Victor's emails instructing me to approve them. "These are the actual violations I refuse to approve," I explained, "not for personal gain, but because they broke the law." One by one, I methodically dismantled Victor's allegations, using only official company records and unedited communications. No secret recordings, no anonymous videos, just the plain, documented truth. Victor's composure began to crack. "These are taken out of context. I was simply trying to meet client needs while what?" I interrupted. "While violating federal law? While excluding people with disabilities from public spaces?" The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. I continued methodically presenting evidence, project by project, violation by violation. "Miss Harlow, The general counsel interjected. This is certainly concerning, but Mr. Reeves has provided recordings that suggest you've been less than ethical yourself. Those recordings were selectively edited, I replied. I have the originals. I played the complete conversations, where it became clear that Victor had cut and spliced my statements to completely change their meaning, where he'd made it sound like I was threatening clients. The full recordings showed me explaining legal liabilities they might face for non-compliance. Victor's face flushed deep red. This proves nothing. She's manipulated these files. Digital timestamps and metadata would prove otherwise, I said calmly. Your IT department can verify them. As Victor's defense crumbled, I noticed something strange. He kept glancing nervously at his phone, which was buzzing with incoming messages. Elliot cleared his throat. Victor, would you care to respond to these allegations? Victor loosened his collar. This is a witch hunt. Bryn has had it out for me since day one because I challenged her rigid interpretations. Rigid interpretations of what? Civil rights laws? I asked. You're being dramatic. Am I? I turned to address the room. Yesterday, I visited Pinewood Medical Center, one of our recent projects. I asked to use the accessible bathroom that Victor insisted was close enough to compliance. I pulled out my phone and displayed photos. The turning radius is 4 inches too small. Do you know what that means in practical terms? It means someone in a wheelchair can enter the bathroom but can't turn around to leave. They become trapped. The room fell silent. This isn't about bureaucratic red tape, I continued. It's about human dignity. It's about whether we believe everyone deserves equal access to the spaces we create. Victor's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and the color drained from his face. If you'll excuse me, he muttered, standing abruptly. We're not finished here, Elliot said sharply. I need to take this call. Sit down, Victor. The authority in Elliot's voice made Victor sink back into his chair. His phone continued to vibrate in his hand. Something wrong? I asked innocently. Victor glared at me with naked hatred. What did you do? I presented the truth, that's all. His phone buzzed again. Unable to resist, he glanced at the screen, then looked up at me with dawning horror. You said you wouldn't release it. I blinked, genuinely confused. Release what? Before he could respond, the boardroom door opened. Patrick Wallace, Victor's high-powered attorney, walked in, followed by a young woman in a wheelchair. The room fell silent. The woman couldn't have been more than 16, with intelligent eyes and an unmistakable resemblance to Patrick. Sorry to interrupt, Patrick said, his voice cold. I'm Patrick Wallace. This is my daughter, Lily. Victor looked like he might be sick. Mr. Greaves, Patrick continued, addressing Elliot. I believe you've received my email regarding Mr. Reeves' conduct. Elliot nodded slowly. Just now, yes. Then you understand why we're here. Victor stood up, panic evident on his face. Patrick, whatever you think I've done, save it. Patrick cut him off. My daughter wanted to see the man who believes people like her don't deserve equal access to public spaces. Lily wheeled forward, stopping directly across from Victor. You said it's not worth spending millions to accommodate 10% of people. Her voice was steady, her gaze unflinching. I'm part of that 10%. The blood drained from Victor's face. That conversation was private. How did you... My dad's assistant recorded you at the bar last night, she explained. She recognized you from her brother's workplace. Her brother uses a wheelchair too. I suddenly understood. The mysterious ally, the person who'd sent me the recording of Victor and Patrick's phone call, the video from the bar, it had been Patrick's assistant all along. Victor, Elliot said, his voice unnaturally calm. Would you care to explain what Miss Wallace is referring to? Victor's eyes darted around the room, seeking escape. I may have had too much to drink, said things I didn't mean. Like admitting you falsified compliance documents, Patrick asked, or bragging about receiving kickbacks for helping clients circumvent accessibility laws. The general counsel leaned forward. Kickbacks? Victor's defense collapsed entirely. This is absurd. You can't possibly. I've already filed complaints with the State Licensing Board and the Department of Justice, Patrick interrupted. The video evidence is quite compelling. What followed was the professional equivalent of a public execution. As Victor stammered through increasingly desperate denials, Patrick methodically outlined the legal consequences of his actions, both for Victor personally and potentially for the firm. However, Patrick concluded, Ms. Harlow's detailed documentation shows she consistently pushed for compliance despite pressure. That will significantly mitigate the firm's liability. All eyes turned to me. I had remained silent during Patrick's presentation, watching Victor's world collapse around him. Did you plan this? Victor hissed at me. I met his gaze. No, I didn't know about the video until last night. And, unlike you, I chose not to use it. His eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. But you could have. Yes, why didn't you? The question hung in the air. The truth was, I had wrestled with that decision all night. The video would have destroyed him instantly, but something about using it felt wrong, too much like becoming what I despised about him. Because this was never about destroying you, Victor. It was about protecting people from your decisions. The meeting concluded with Victor being placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. As people filed out of the boardroom, Lily wheeled over to me. Thank you, she said simply. For what? I didn't know about the video. She smiled. Not for that. For caring enough to fight. Most people don't. As she turned to leave, I realized something. How did you know I didn't use the video? That I chose not to release it? Kamala told me, my dad's assistant. She said you texted back last night that you wouldn't need it, that you'd find another way. You know what's strange? I said. For weeks, I fantasized about taking Victor down, but when I had the chance to destroy him completely, it didn't feel right. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, Lily replied. It's change. Those words stayed with me long after the meeting ended. 3 weeks later, the firm announced significant changes. Victor had resigned to pursue other opportunities, a corporate euphemism that fooled no one. The Department of Justice had opened an investigation into his conduct. 5 projects were undergoing emergency retrofitting to address accessibility violations. My new role as Director of Accessibility and Compliance was made permanent, with expanded authority and resources. More importantly, the firm established a community advisory board that included people with various disabilities to review major projects. The most meaningful change came 6 months later, when we unveiled the renovated Pinewood Medical Center. Every bathroom now exceeded accessibility requirements. Every pathway included proper tactile strips. Every entrance featured automatic doors with the correct dimensions. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I watched an elderly man in a wheelchair navigate the space with ease, his face showing none of the frustration and humiliation that so many experience in poorly designed buildings. Elliot stood beside me. You know, when this all started, I thought you were being rigid, uncompromising. And now? He gestured toward the elderly man, who was now demonstrating to his grandchildren how easily he could maneuver in the spacious bathroom. Now I understand what was really at stake. That evening, I visited my grandmother's grave, bringing fresh flowers and news of my work. As I sat beside her headstone, I thought about Victor, who had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and most fatally, underestimated the power of designing spaces for everyone. My revenge wasn't in his professional destruction, though that had certainly happened. My revenge wasn't even in taking his position or undoing his harmful work. My true revenge was in creating spaces where people like my grandmother, like Lily, like the elderly man at Pinewood, could move through the world with dignity, where a mother wouldn't have to explain to her son why he couldn't use a public bathroom, where architecture embraced humanity in all its diverse forms. Victor had seen accessibility as an expensive inconvenience. I had shown it was an essential right, and in doing so, I had changed not just one man's career, but an entire firm's approach to the spaces they created. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't found in destroying your enemy, but in building something they never believed possible. Something that remains long after the battle is forgotten. I placed my hand on my grandmother's headstone. We did it, Gran, I whispered. The world's a little more accessible today, and that was a victory worth fighting for. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Have you ever witnessed or experienced accessibility issues that could have been easily addressed with proper design? Share your experiences in the comments. Your stories matter and deserve to be heard. Together, we can create a world where everyone has equal access to the spaces we all share.